Funny story about me, any guy that's been in an athletic environment, in a locker room environment, knows that it's not uncommon to receive a little slap on the rear from a fellow male teammate as either a congratulations or a hey, we'll get him next time. And my teammates would always joke, Connor, your glutes are just so tight. And I thought that was a compliment, as if, all those squats were starting to pay off. But what I didn't realize is how that could potentially be influencing some of the injuries I was working through at the time. You see, the glutes and external rotators of the pelvis that do this are on the back side, the posterior side of the pelvis. And these muscles are meant to open the pelvis at the top and close it at the bottom. This is external rotation at the hip, which then externally rotates the femurs as well. The big muscles on the back side of our pelvis that are external rotators and open up our pelvis like this are the glute max, but deeper than that, you have the piriformis and also deep hip external rotator muscles like the gemelli muscles. These attach deeper than the glutes onto the sacrum and also on the pelvis. So the point is if you have tightness back here, that can either pull your pelvis down into a posterior pelvic orientation so you could have something like a rounded low back. Or what can happen is if you're in an anterior pelvic orientation, you could sense that your pelvis is falling too far forward. So what you might want to do unconsciously, your body might concentrically orient or tighten all the muscles back here to bring your pelvis into more of an upright state so you don't feel like your pelvis is going so far forward into an anterior orientation. This is usually a compensation when you're starting in an already forward pelvic position. So when you have compression back here, you can see how this would potentially compress some of the nerves that run through the pelvis down into the lower leg, like the sciatic nerve. And you can also see how that would potentially lead to what we know as piriformis syndrome. And these are the same people that also struggle to feel their glutes contract because they're already contracting. So they might think they need to do a bunch of glute bridges to facilitate their glutes to fire, but the problem is in order for a muscle to contract, it needs to stretch first. That's how muscles work, because muscles go from elongated positions to shorter positions. It's very hard to get your glutes to fire if they're already in a shortened position, bringing your pelvis into this orientation. So in order to accomplish this, we need to get into 90 degrees of hip flexion, because that, biomechanically speaking, is when the pelvic outlet needs to open up and the pelvis goes into internal rotation, and we also get those muscles to eccentrically elongate back here. So biasing ourselves into this position can be very advantageous. Here are a couple of exercises I really like for not only taking stress off of these tight muscles back here, the glutes and deep hip external rotators, but it's also going to allow us to pick up leverage to find the internal rotation that has been missing as a result of these chronically tight muscles back here. Place a small elevation about 3 to 4 inches underneath your knee in a bent position and keep the other leg fully extended out. And then notice how he drops his hip on the extended side and then pushes his back hip further back. That should allow him to shift into that backside hip. And you should feel a slight stretch in your back pocket of the knee that is bent in that back hip. Make sure you can keep a nice neutral spine with slightly unlocked elbows, and then hold that position as you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. As you stay shifted into that back hip, you should feel your adductor or inner thigh muscle on that bent knee side. Make sure your extended leg isn't too far forward or backward. The reason why my whole foot is elevated here is because that's going to allow me to get deeper into hip flexion more easily without having to force it. And the reason why the toes are elevated is because that's going to allow me to actually bias internal rotation of the femur and also the pelvis. In addition, the same side load is allowing me to shift more easily into that side. So you want to make sure that when you're in that bottom position, your nose is over the big toe, you're pushing your hips back, and you have your knee and your foot and also your pelvis in alignment. This is a similar position to the last exercise, but it just might be a little bit more comfortable with a more narrow stance. Here, it's important that we're keeping our weight heavy on the back heel, and we're actively trying to push the front opposite knee a little bit forward, which will help us shift into that back hip and open up that pelvic outlet a little bit more. So essentially, you don't want that front knee, in this instance, my left knee, to come back too much. Actively think about pushing it forward, and then that should allow you to shift better.